Don't bet the family farm on it. Politicians in Paris, Warsaw, Brussels, even New Delhi won't magically find the quick fix for an agriculture sector that's gone global at the expense of small producers. Why is it erupting all over, including here in France? Many of those who heckled President Macron at the opening last Saturday of Paris's big annual ag fair say they wish they could live from the fruit of their labor. But new environmental norms and open borders, they say, make it impossible to compete. Many of them cheered the far right's leader when he showed up the next day. In India, those protesting leaned more towards the left. The enemy, they say, isn't sorely needed food safety and biodiversity standards, but World Trade Organization rules that let the foxes in amongst the chickens. Global wholesalers and distributors who they say write the rules and impose their will. So, how best to protect small farming in the 21st century? Today in the France 24 debate, what is the sustainable path forward? With us, he's a cattle and poultry farmer from Normandy, Arnold Puech d'Alissac, president of the World Farmers Organization. You're also a board member of France's biggest farmers group, the FNSEA. Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to another farmer, an organic farmer from the central Auvergne region. Chickens, what else have we got? Goats.
Vegetal crops as well.
And vegetal crops. Henri Landès, co-founder of the Land Destiny group, which advocates for biodiversity and promotes sustainable agriculture. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, my pleasure too.
From the Brittany resort of Dinard, Jean-Luc Demarty, former Director General for External Trade at the European Commission. Before that, at the Commission's Agriculture Department. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having invited me. I hear the sound, but I don't see the image on my PC.
Okay. We'll try to have that fixed. We can see you loud and crystal clear. We'll be joined from Oxford by Pritam Singh, who is a professor of economics and the author of Federalism, Nationalism, and Development. Your reactions, by the way, on the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, these protests have been taking place for weeks all over Europe. Dateline this Wednesday, the main highway linking Girona in Spain to Perpignan in southern France. Spanish farmers for the second day running, staging a blockade, at times emptying trucks that bring in cheaper produce from Morocco. Here in France, well, it's Wednesday, but ears are still ringing from the turbulence that followed Emmanuel Macron when he met the wrath of farmers last Saturday at the opening of the annual agriculture fair.
Do not paint a catastrophic picture of our agriculture. No. But let's listen to each other. Let's start with the facts. There are people facing very significant difficulties. I'm just saying that there is a reality there. France's farming sector remains strong. It produces. When I look at things, most sectors produce for our needs, and some even export. That's also why we can't isolate France from the rest of the world, or even Europe, because in the cereal sector and many others, we are exporters. There are many sectors where if we cut off exports, pork, cereals or others, it messes up everyone. And it's not true that in Europe we say we'll close in Spain for viticulture, but continue to export to others. So that's not true. It's not true that in Europe we say we'll...
That heated exchange, Arnold Puech d'Alissac, it's also serves as a reminder that for decades now, agriculture is something that's been decided upon at the European level, particularly with the subsidy scheme known as the Common Agricultural Policy. Your thoughts on, well, how raucous it was on Saturday. There was tear gas at times, there was riot police inside the main halls, and what you saw in that exchange. What was your reaction listening back to that?
We are in a special time of the French policy, but the farming policy all over the world. After the beginning of the war, the income of the farmer increased really in Europe and all over the world.
The war in Ukraine?
Yes, because of the risk of scarcity of food everywhere in the world. But now we are exactly at the opposite. We see that we seem to have enough food, and the price of a lot of commodities are going down everywhere in the world. And of course, in this case, when your cost of production is increasing, as all the sectors of the economy, of course, the farmers suffer a lot and don't see a good year at all, and they see now the new difficulty are started.
And they want protections at the border. And Emmanuel Macron's there saying to them, wait a minute, we have to solve this at the European level.
Yes, exactly. We have to solve that at the European level. It's at the European level where is the border now?
Henri Landès.
It's difficult for the European Union to behave the same way that the United States or China do, which are two big trade partners and two very two big influential economies with regards to food. Meaning, yes, the borders are the European Union. They got to get 27 countries in agreement on how to do the policy. And the fact is that if you are in a world food system, which we are, you have countries that do things very differently with regards to protecting their own farmers. The United States and China have much higher protectionist measures of their farmers, guaranteeing better pricing for those farmers, whether it be on wheat, on sugar, etc. And that makes it very difficult for countries such as France to then do their own policies to protect these farmers because there's competition within the European Union.
So you're saying there should be tariffs at the border of the European Union?
If you're going to have a world food trade system, you need the same rules for everybody. Otherwise, you're going to have penalization of certain countries and certain populations of farmers. And that's what's happened in France. That's what's happened in the European Union because they're in competition with each other. You have much higher prices that are applied to imported goods from other countries that go into the United States and that go into China, particularly, again, on wheat and sugar and a lot of other milk, et cetera. And some of these countries, China and the United States, still have quotas on a lot of products to manage the production, and so that you don't have the classic supply and demand problem of having too much production and low prices. The main problem for farmers in a lot of industrialized countries, but particularly in the European Union and in France, is that they're not making enough money for what they're, and then there's another issue, which is what happens on the supply chain within the country. That is the intermediaries in the industry and then in large retail stores.
We'll talk about those intermediaries in a moment, but I just want to get your reaction, Jean-Luc Demarty, to that point about the fact that Europe, I mean, you're old enough to remember when there used to be every year complaints about the mounds of butter that were produced in the EU, and farmers were effectively paid to let them rot. That's no longer the case. You agree that Europe is overexposed compared to competitors?
I fully disagree. I fully disagree what Mr. Landès said. In reality, it's true that China is not a market economy. They are protecting through different means. But the EU and the United States have different systems, but it's not true that the US are protecting more than the EU and vice versa, because the systems are different, but the price of wheat are the same, for example, in Europe than in US. Sugar is a very special case because an overprotected sector in US, but in reality, we have to look at the level of support we are giving. 40 billion euros for farmers in Europe, 7 billion euros of income support, also 7 billion in France. And also we have been very successful because what has not been said, that Europe is one of the bigger exporters of food in the world, and we have increased our surplus, our balance surplus in trade, in agriculture and products, in food products, moving from 10 billion euro of excess of surplus 15 years ago to 70 billion euro in 2023, after 15 years of several new free trade agreement, which shows that what has been saying about free trade agreements being penalizing Europe is completely wrong.
All right, so Jean-Luc Demarty, let's take a listen back. On Monday, there was a meeting of EU agriculture ministers. They met to discuss simplifying the EU's subsidy scheme. Less red tape was one of the issues. And yeah, they were sounded like they were recognizing the problem put forth by Henri Landès. Let's take a listen to Latvia's agriculture minister.
We must change a lot in the CAP, because this green deal and the green targets what we have to reach, it's almost impossible to reach. At the same time, there is import from third countries where they are not reaching our EU standards. They are producing without any these targets, let's say climate change targets, environmental targets, what we have to fulfill. And that's actually, my understanding, that's the main message from the farmers. It's hard to compete in the markets.
Jean-Luc Demarty, that's not your diagnosis?
I'm not saying there are no problems in agriculture. Let's be clear. There are problems in agriculture. If not, the agriculture will not demonstrate in the streets in Europe. So let's not be naive about that. But we have also to explain a bit what is happening. First, no product could enter in the EU internal market without respecting the EU standards, sanitary, phytosanitary standards. Impossible. Impossible to export to Europe meat produced from hormones or antibiotics, as it is the case in the United States, for example. So it's clear that not all the production standards are the same between Europe and the rest of the world, but also we have protection, some tariff protection, and also we have also our income support, 40 billion I've mentioned, 7 billion in France, which are precisely there to compensate the difference of production costs between the rest of the world and the EU.
All right, so the system has regulation, has support, state support for farmers. Let's bring out and welcome to the conversation Pritam Singh, Professor Emeritus of Economics at Oxford Brookes Business School, the author of Federalism, Nationalism and Development. Thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate. What's it all about, these protests, for you?
Well, the protests in India by the farmers, which started in 2020, and which was against 3 farm laws, which the Indian government had brought in. And those laws, the crux of those laws was to hand over agriculture to big agribusiness corporations who are close to the regime. And the farmers were able to mobilize massively, and eventually the government knew that it will not be able to repress this farmers' protest. So they agreed eventually to withdraw the farms. And one of the agreements at that time was to provide minimum support price to the farmers. And and a committee was supposed to be set up. And the committee was set up, but didn't have the farmers' representative, proper farmers' representative. And so it has been hanging on for almost 3 years now. And now the farmers have again restarted the struggle, saying that we want implementation of minimum support price. And they have come up with this idea that it's WTO rules which do not allow minimum support price to be fixed up. At least that's what the government says, So they said, okay, get out of WTO.
Is it correct to say that? Are those the WTO rules?
Well, there is ambiguity. There is an ambiguity in WTO rules. At one level, at a general level, it says that there should be no subsidies, there should not be protection because you want free trade and you want level playing field. But it says that there can be exceptions for the developing countries. Okay, so in theory, one can say that the Indian government can say that yes, we are using this clause, of protection for the developing countries to give the minimum support price to the farmers. But it's quite possible that Indian government is using this only as a pretext and not bargaining enough with the WTO, that, we are still within the WTO framework if we provide the subsidy to the farmers in the form of minimum support price. Because agriculture for the farmers, especially for the small farmers, is a matter of existence. It's not simply having reasonable income. Their entire way of life is going to be destroyed. And there are 86% farmers are in a small farmer category. They will not be able to compete with big farms. So there has to be a system of protection for those small farms. So that's where the whole debate about free trade, WTO, comes in.
Over in India, where it's day 15 of the daily Chalo March on the capital, the movement, a reminder of the big protests, like you were saying, of 2021. many coming out in large parts from places like Haryana and Punjab state. And yeah, that word minimum support price coming up a lot. Let's take a listen.
The government wants us to diversify crops. We ask them for a minimum support price. Do that, and crop diversification will happen on its own.
Arnaud Puech-Dalissac, the World Farmers Organization, includes one of the big Indian umbrella groups that's involved in these protests. What's your religion when it comes to this idea of a minimum support price? And you heard the point there made by Pritam Singh that it's the small farmers we're talking about. Those are the ones that are in danger.
Last year at our General Assembly, we review our policy paper on trade. And the first point we introduce is the importance of the food sovereignty. It's that in each country, you have to decide what you want to do. If you want to be to close part of your border and to decide what is your level of sovereignty, you have to decide that. And after you open your market to trade competition and to complete the offer you need for your consumer. But first, decide what you want to do. It's really the position of the farmer. Of course, some sectors of the economy sometimes prefer to find cheap food from nowhere to be the more competitive as possible when they export after what they produce, what they transform, what they process.
And how do you feel about it?
I defend the farmer's interests, and it's fundamental that the farmer, who are really the base of each country, have correct income. If they are small, if they have large farm, if they are recent farmer, if the whole family, I don't know, I don't care about that. It's important to defend this producer who really give they are the spirit of the country, but they are also the people in charge of the food security of your country. In a troubled world as we have now, it's important to have this level of sovereignty.
Here in France, the movement began in the southwest, in areas where there's still lots of small family farms, and those are the ones that are struggling the most, Henri Landès.
What is important to remind is that this is not a few years problem, not a couple of decades, it's almost a century problem at this point, of not only forgetting about the importance of having a solid base of the economy and society around agriculture and having farming. 10,000 farms disappear in France every year, and that's still today when we've raised awareness about it over the last few years. These crises, these protests are not significant of just a few years of a problem. It's a long-term problem. It's also a disinterest of society to the detriment of farming that has grown and that has intensified as countries have industrialized as well.
A disinterest in farming, or
Absolutely.
just simply that now there are more efficient and bigger operations for producing the food that we eat?
If you have larger and larger farms that are more and more mechanized, that is one way of farming, but you do open up to a lot of vulnerability when you do have to then face either climatic conditions that are getting difficult, or you face different pests, or you face other aspects of dealing with nature, because that's what farmers do. They work with living elements. When you have less diversity on a farm, you open up yourself to exposure. You open up yourself to exposure as well when you're in both a world system with lots of different ways of protecting farmers amongst countries. And I disagree with Demarty that there are higher prices in different countries in these big economic powers once again, and very often to the detriment of lots of European products. But I'm not being chauvinistic with the European Union here. I'm saying that precisely the fact that you have different systems worldwide make it so that it's difficult to do trade. That's the first thing. And then secondly, you have supply chains that have made it very difficult for farmers to negotiate effectively and to be respected financially by industry and even more so retail stores, large retail chains. Now, to come back to that, what does that mean? That means that if you want to both align with ecological scientific elements, which is that nature produces in diversity and not in monoculture and not in very intense and large-scale farms, for one. And secondly, you want to also be respected financially in a world food system, then you got to apply not only a diversification process within that country of favoring diversified farms, but also more farmers. And then you can still have large farms with very high tech and large and machines, but that is also a big economic vulnerability. Those things cost a lot of money too. And a lot of the problem for farmers today is they're having trouble reimbursing debts in addition to not being paid that much. And then we talk about environmental preoccupations. That's a lot to swallow. And that's what we're going through right now.
Yeah, things like relaxing, I ask you because you have a farm, relaxing rules on growing more hedges or preserving them, on keeping land fallow. The big farms can do it. The little ones, it's harder.
Of course, the rules need to find really the right implementation, and the idea of to create set-asides for biodiversity and high level of set-aside, 4% of the European territory need to be put in set-aside for biodiversity. We think it's too much. We have no étude d'impact. I forgot the word. Impact assessment.
Environmental impact study.
Yes. About that, and as farmer, and I have had a set aside in the past, I know that sometimes to live in a small part of close to edges, close to tree in set aside, that's enough for the biodiversity. But really, to push the good land of Europe in set aside in a time where we need to produce more and more biomass for the balance of the carbon economy, it's not a good choice.
Jean-Luc Demarty, your thoughts on this?
I fully agree with what Mr. Puech-Delissac said on the set aside, on the fallow, compulsory fallow. It should be voluntary, in my view.
Voluntary.
Yeah, and remunerated and voluntary. So, which was the case in the past. I don't see why we should set aside 4% of the area. Secondly, I think we have to stop with the religion of small farming, because one of the main problems in France, as the average size of farms is too small, 70 hectares per farm. It's different. It's clear that the level of competitiveness for a farm depends on what it produces.
Not many people want to install themselves on large farms anymore, Mr. Demarty.
What?
Not that many people want to go and do big farms and install themselves on large farms.
It's not what you want.
Yes, it is. It is. When you have no more farmers, then yes, it is. Absolutely. You're absolutely wrong. You do not. No. It's not necessary for competition. What's necessary is for society to be able to produce food in a most sustainable, financially, economic, and ecological way. You don't just impose something on a whole society because it's economically competitive. That's only one part of the problem.
That's you who is imposing something.
I'm not imposing anything. I actually said that it was important to have complementary.
Jean-Luc Demarty.
Well, when he's saying nonsense, I'm not going to let him talk. Sorry.
Yeah,
of course you can, but it's nonsense, so I'm not going to let you talk about it too long. Jeez.
So what is necessary is to develop the competitivity of farming, and in ecologically acceptable way. Say what is necessary. It's not trying to reintroduce small farms which are not competitive and which would produce people which will not
small
get
farms are competitive.
enough income. It's not serious. It's not serious.
It's not serious. What is unfortunately not serious is continuing to favor a system where they're not making any money, where they're in distorted competition rules worldwide, and where ecologically. What do you mean they're not making it? But why do you think they're in the streets? You have people. Why do you think they're in the streets? They're obviously suffering economically. That's the main reason. You cannot deny also that there are ecological principles to abide by, and the fact is that large monoculture farms that have heavily intensified mechanization are not the most sustainable thing. I'm not saying to get rid of them. I'm saying to help them modify their farming. And I didn't even say that they weren't complementary with small farms. And you're just saying that we should impose a fact of having no more small farms? That's just ridiculous. You don't even have most people that want outside of the farming business that want to become farmers that want to have enormously intensified farms anyway. So until you find a way to have robots on your big farms that with no more humans that exist in them, and then find a way to fight climate change and preserve biodiversity, which is the elements of how you make farming work anyway, it's not going to work, Mr. Demarty.
Jean-Luc Demarty.
You want to reintroduce the farming of France of the 1950s. So it's not a way to build modern farming. Modern farming has to have a sufficient economic size, respecting ecological and environmental constraints, which should be reasonable. That's what's the future. And if the model you are pushing will reduce production of agricultural products in Europe and in France, and at the end of the day, we would be in a situation to losing security of supply in Europe, which is normally guaranteed by the Treaty of Rome, Treaty of Lisbon today, and I don't understand what it would lead to. It would lead by ideology. It would really lead
No,
to
the only person here with an ideology is you, Mr. DeMarti, because I actually talked about a diversified system which allows countries to actually go towards more local production with the complementarity of trade. And you're talking about an ideology of just increasing size so that they're more competitive. I've never seen something more ideological in this debate than what you just said.
Let me bring in Pritam Singh on this because India is a country where right now the population for the majority still lives in rural areas, is moving to the city. What lessons do you draw when you see what's happening right now to small farms in Britain, in France, in Germany and the likes?
Well, one thing which I want to kind of introduce is that this idea that only large farms are more competitive is questionable. Various studies in India on farm size and productivity show that per acre production on small farms is actually higher than the bigger farms. So actually, it is a myth which has been created by ideologists of competition that bigger farmers are more competitive. So that's purely on empirical basis, that's questionable, that bigger farms are more competitive in terms of producing output per acre. Secondly, this idea that competition is the main thing and ecology must be added as a subordinate thing is questionable in this world. Because when we are faced with a huge danger of climate change, global warming, which will destroy this planet, and you say that that's only an additional thing. It's that we should aim at competition, and provided it is ecologically compatible. And so provided ecologically compatible is being added to. But the point is that at this level, we need farms to produce output which is ecologically sound, both for them, both for agriculture and also for the consumers. The problem here comes is that the governments are interested in keeping inflation low. So they put pressure on supermarkets to keep the food prices low. The supermarkets put pressure on the farmers to sell them the produce at the lowest possible price. And sometimes farmers don't. One farmer in Britain told me that he actually gets only 1p out of 1 liter of milk because the supermarkets pressurize them so much because the government wants them to keep the prices low. So the supermarkets, sale of goods will be included in the inflation. So it is that pressure which is leading to the destruction of the small farms, not because small farms are not productive and they are not competitive. So I think this myth has to be abolished, that large are the only ones. And apart from the point which was mentioned, that large farms are much more ruthless in destroying biodiversity because small farmer is more careful. He or she knows what is the level of what quality, the kind of species, and is more caring about the nature. Large mechanized farmer is indiscriminate in dealing with the land. So that point has to be brought into this picture, that this emphasis on competition, which is the ideology of the WTO, has to be questioned.
Is that how you see it as well, Arnold Puech-Darissac, the World Trade Organization, which is having its annual meeting right now?
We have, of course, a large farm in Oceania with 1,000 hectares, 10,000 hectares. We have that also in Russia. We have that also in Canada. And we have a small farm everywhere in Africa, in Malawi, in Kenya. And every farmer in his country try to find the right balance. And I don't want to oppose one system.
So you agree with Henri Landès that you do need a balance. You do need both.
We need both, of course. You will not change immediately from one system to another. And also in my country, sometimes some large farm stop to work because the next generation don't want to be farmer, and it's you share the farm in different owners of the land, and you start with relatively a small farm at the beginning, but everybody can find his happiness in his job. But what is important, it's now in Europe, and I will speak about Europe really, and what we see, but Africa, India have I think the same problem. The price of the food paid to the farmer need to be maybe to increase 10 or 20% to get the price we have 6 months ago. All simply because it's now the price are low and the price in the shop is not going down, and it's the farmer who suffer, and it's not the consumer who is the benefit who have the benefit.
Yeah, for the 12,000 years since humanity's had agriculture, there's been that tussle between the ones who produce and the ones who sell at the markets. At the Ag Fair here in Paris that's still going on, protesters didn't just target politicians this week. They also trashed the stand of French multinational dairy giant Lactalis. Lactalis accused of extorting small milk farmers.
We're saying enough. They offer 420 euros for a tonne of milk when it costs 440 euros to produce it and 500 to pay farmers. That's what we're talking about.
Milk's a particularly sore subject because that was deregulated not long ago.
Yes, and you know, the dairy producer, they work a lot. You have to milk your cow every days of the years, morning and evening, and of course, they need to be correctly paid. And Lactalis at this time have a little bit problem with his producer because they are maybe 10% lower than the best price that we can have in France.
Because they're all powerful, because they're big and they can name their price.
Yes, and they use the law at their advantage. But they don't feel that really more and more dairy producers stop to have dairy cow because the price is too low. And if they continue like that, tomorrow they will miss producer.
So what do you do? Is it the free market that decides? Or
No.
What do you do when it comes to Lactalis, for instance? What do you do?
In France, you have the Egalim law who allow you to have a correct discussion and balanced discussion with the industry. And unfortunately, with Lactalis, at this time, it's very difficult.
Jean-Luc Demarty, how do you deal with again, a big multinational dairy giant like the one we're discussing that has the power to set its price when it comes to small milk farmers, small dairy farmers?
Precisely, it is one of the big problems. And I remember as Director General for Agriculture, I have chaired a group, a high-level group composed of representatives of all member states in 2009, 2010, which has led to a recommendation which has been transformed in a legislation in Europe, which authorized regrouping of farmers, producer organization, negotiating price and volume, with the industrial for their milk and also for other products, and which something which was not authorized by competition rule in Europe up to now. Now it has been authorized since 2013, and in my view, that was Egalim law is lacking. Instead of recommending or even making compulsory the negotiation of producer organization with the industry, with the processing like Lactalis or Bongrain in France, they are only making compulsory the individual contract of farmers with the industrial, which is putting the farmer, in my view, at a disadvantage. And what is lacking. So I'm deep in favor of this negotiation between producer organization and the industry, enterprise by enterprise, and I'm sure that it could produce very interesting effect. I really deplore that it has been properly used in France, and the Egalim law is not properly written in order to favorize the regrouping of farmers is a negotiation of price and volume with the industry.
Okay, so the farmers have to contend with wholesalers at the national level, but also at the international level. Henri Landès, you take the biggest wholesale food giants like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland, two huge U.S. multinationals, they set their prices as well, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I agree with what Marty said around the implementation of the Galim law. I think that it's important to take a step back and see what kind of interactions you do have between multinational corporations and then decision makers. I'm not a specialist of how Cargill, Tyson Foods come in and affect negotiations at the European Union level. I'm only going to just extract conclusions that there's probably a large influence of large corporations and traffic jams of negotiations, but I'm not going to comment on that.
Because what you've got the so you have the small farmer, you've got the big farmer, then you have the you
have cooperatives also that try and help farms negotiate as well with these with the different parts of the supply chain, which is industry and processing, and then large retail stores.
Yeah.
The issue is, yes, when you do have international negotiations, then you have multinational corporations that can almost supersede those national negotiations. That becomes very difficult to handle.
So who's the most powerful? Is it the supermarket chains? Is it the wholesalers? Certainly not the small farmers.
I don't want
to discuss here.
You know, this is not scientifically demonstrated because this is a sociological study that is necessary. I'm gonna conjecture large corporations in retail and in industry have more power than any other stakeholder at the table.
Pritam Singh, you agree?
Yes, absolutely, I agree with that. That's one of the reasons that the whole world food market is being distorted by the power of these big multinational corporations. And their influence sometimes is open, but sometimes is very disguised. It doesn't come out in the open. But they have advisors, they have experts. None of them, virtually none of them, have any experience of farming. And that's one of the problems in setting agricultural policies. The people who set the policies, who frame the policies, very few of them grounded reality of agriculture farms. Similarly, the subject of agriculture economics used to be a very important subject in the universities. That has been downgraded to financial economics. Very rarely you find agriculture would be given a Nobel Prize because agriculture has been downgraded. And as a result of that, you find that big corporations which have experts, they are financial experts, they are competitive experts, but they have very little knowledge about the grounded level farming. So that's why the experience of the small farmer does not get incorporated. It's very important that in any country, at a national level, but also at an international level, farmers' organizations must be integrally, structurally involved in the negotiation process. And that's what the farmers in India are saying, that we are not involved. Policies are just imposed on us. For example, 21, that the big agro business corporations just wanted to take over production, transportation, retailing of agriculture. And farmers were not consulted and they were just imposed. And the COVID was taken as an advantage that if you introduce a law when the COVID is on, farmers will not be able to mobilize. And in a stealth fashion, you will be able to introduce that. But Indian farmers showed maturity, innovation, creativity. They mobilized on a massive scale. And people also supported them because people know that farmers are the ones who daily produce us food, bread, butter, milk, and daily. Secondly, people who have migrated to the cities, many of them have their grandparents of parents who had worked in agriculture. They had sympathy with the farmers. So that's why the mass mobilization of the farmers led to pushing back this agenda of big agribusiness.
Yeah, pushing back against the government there, and we see a similar vein here, where the French are proud of their peasant roots and have huge sympathy for those who are protesting. It's interesting because we're talking about the whole chain, and the bigger the corporations, the more you're sort of alienated from the whole process. That goes for the farmers. It goes for the middlemen, as has just been described. Could we also say that it goes for consumers? They're seeing a global system that at times has them worried at this point in time. Right now, in places like the United States, they've done studies on how people eat, and they have found that one 2018 study by the University of California's Nutrition Policy Institute compared the price at the supermarket of apples, bananas, oranges, carrots, and tomatoes and found them to be more expensive in poorer neighborhoods. More than 4 out of 10 convenience stores in California don't even sell fresh produce, they say. The same year, a study in the UK found that nearly 1 in 10 of England and Wales's most economically deprived areas are what's called food deserts, areas that are low on supermarkets and even lower on greengrocers. Instead, very high densities of fast food outlets. So the demand for what's being grown is shifting according to socioeconomic class as well. Arnold Puech-Dalissac, if we're going to save the planet and humanity, we need to eat right. So what do you grow? How do you get what's both good for you and affordable?
You speak about Scotland. In UK, they have a slogan, back British farming. It's important that everywhere in the world, people need to be proud of the food they can find in their country and support first the food from their country. In France, we are in a country, and Jean-Luc Demarty, like you, we know how the French consumers it's proud of the
food. Yeah, but now we go to Italy and we say there the tomatoes still taste like the tomatoes used to taste when we were younger.
At this time of the year, when you buy tomatoes, of course, it came not from only with the sun. It came because you have greenhouse and you can't expect to have the right tomatoes. But in May, in June, and during 6 months of the year, you have really some good potatoes who are not produced far from where you are.
Henri Landès.
If you want to ensure a system where you're going to be sustainable from an economic standpoint, environmental standpoint, and most importantly, social standpoint for these farmers to be able to make a living and be happy, you need to accompany them, help them go towards agroecological practices. That is a consensus. It doesn't mean you go from A to Z really quickly and brutally. You need to help them, financially secure them. And that means that you have to also give a little bit of stability to that transition. And that doesn't mean that every farm needs to be 10 acres, 30 or 40. It means that you need to help farmers go towards that so that they can be in good health themselves, so that the food is healthy when it comes out onto the shelves or in the plates of consumers. And then consumers also need to become very interested in this topic, and they should be in the streets with farmers.
Do you feel as though after the protests and all the conversations of these past weeks that we're thinking more about that there is?
Yes, a little bit, very little bit.
No, it was not the main asking from the farmer. They're really afraid by the implementation of the European new agriculture program, and at the same time they are under the pressure of the bad price and the increase of the cost of the production. It's mainly that who put that into the street. After that, they can have a big project for their farm and look where they want to go, where will be the next generation. But it's not the reflection that they have now.
As always, the balance between the urgent and the important. Arnold Puech-Dalissac, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Henri Landès. I want to thank as well Jean-Luc Demarty for being with us from Dinar. Pritam Singh in Oxford, England. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.